In today's episode of the Digital Disruption podcast, we're exploring horizontal digital integration and how it's laying the foundations for in-life servicing and margin growth. Welcome to the Digital Disruption podcast with myself, Chris Williams, and my esteemed colleague, Pete Gatenby.
Hello, Chris.
Hello, mate.
How are we doing?
All good. HDI,
horizontal digital integration, definitely making some traction or getting some traction in the industry.
most definitely.
What are we seeing? What are the conversations you've been having over the last couple of weeks?
So that's been the bedrock of this episode, is the bedrock of this episode, is actually some of the, challenges that we get when we talk about horizontal digital integration in the context of looking at the UK mortgage, home buying and selling landscape and contrasting it with the retail e-commerce landscape. And we have a particular slide where we show a graph, which, we're going to edit and flag up on screen now, some about here. And essentially what that graph shows is and this for those listening and can't actually see this, on the y-axis, we have digital maturity. And on the horizontal axis, we essentially have time. And in the UK mortgage market, if we look at the digital landscape, essentially what we're seeing is at the end of 2023, we hit quite a pinnacle and peak moment. And that was whereby the digital maturity, and we measure digital maturity both in regards to the consumers who are out there in the market, that the vast majority of borrowers and people moving house or buying property are digital natives. That hit a peak. And the other side of that digital maturity measurement that we look at is the in-market actors, the players. So the lenders, law firms, estate agency networks, brokers, et cetera, they also reached a level of digital maturity. And we measure that both on what they're like across the industry in terms of their adoption of technology, but we also look at it in respect of data and how that's being positioned and updated and looked at and going to be leveraged as something to transact with more often through digital means. And we look at a number of other sort of things. But what the challenge often is how can we contrast buying a property, which, let's just say it's £500,000 with, buying a stapler off Amazon that arrives the next day.
And they're different, right?
And they are different. But the other side, the right-hand side of the graph that we show is the e-commerce market. And what that shows is that in 2013, that also hit a peak level of maturity, both
10 years in front.
10 years in front. So, but there's a reason that it was 10 years in front. And the trigger for that reason is and this is why we contrast the two. There's a couple of things that we highlight. The first thing that we highlight is that in 2013, something significant happened in the social media space, and that is a number of IPOs, particularly Facebook's.
Yep.
That IPO triggered the mobile advertising.
Yep.
2012, the IPO took place. And then a year later, we saw the mobile advertising kick in. What that did is that drove the mobile phone screen. That was where users were, and that's where they were able to transact. Their digital transactions increased tenfold. And so what you see on the graph from 2013 to today is you see that trajectory continue to go. Conversely, when we contrast that with the mortgage landscape, what we see from 2023 through 2024, we don't see a dip, but we see a decline in the trajectory of what we refer to as digital maturity. And the reason for that is that we now have entered a new phase, a new realm of transformation in this market, which we refer to as the second phase of transformation, which is the horizontal phase. This is where the ecosystem becomes connected. And what these two graphs show is that there is now a place, and we've got players in market for platform providers who are coming to market to kind of help connect the ecosystem up. There's an opportunity for organizations to interoperate better. And so the challenge that we have sometimes is when we're showing that slide, as I say, because I've said a lot there, but hopefully for context, it helps people. Is how can you sort of contrast the two? But that's how, because we're at a very, very important moment in time now.
But let's just dig into that a little bit, because there's a few. I have many thoughts on this, but the first one is the buying process in e-commerce and the buying process in buying a house is different. One is a fast purchase. It happens rapidly. The time for thought is quick. Often discussing Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Crow, I can't remember his name. But a well-analysed phenomenon about purchase behaviours, short versus long, versus the house buying process, which is obviously quite a lengthy consideration process. You've got stuff to get in the process. That's the bit that people jump on and say you can't compare apples to apples. But actually, I don't think that's what this graph really tells us. What this graph really starts to tell the story of, in my opinion, is the buying journey. Now, what I mean by the buying journey is you talked about the driver in e-commerce being the IPO of Facebook and the advertising and the shift of advertising spend. Because I remember at the time we were heavily involved in a lot of mobile programs, and the shift towards mobile at the time was towards e-commerce mobile. We weren't in the digital marketing space, we were in the digital product space and the platform space. And actually, but the shift of focus was driven by the upstream increase in marketing activity on mobile, which meant they had more mobile traffic, which meant they had to do more and they had to improve the transaction process. And so a lot of development spend and engineering spend moved towards the mobile platforms, which was where we were obviously existing at the time.
And essentially that connected things up. And I think what you've just been explaining there, though, is really important, or there's a point here, which is this. E-commerce, there are many touch points to an e-com transaction.
Yeah, huge, loads.
If you and I want to buy a new Rode mic now, we can load up Amazon and it'll be here tomorrow. But there are over 40 touch points before that actually lands here tomorrow morning, and we can track the thing.
And it's not documented.
No, and there are multiple vendors involved in making that transaction happen, multiple actors, shall we say. Appreciate it's a different purchase value, not legislated in the same way. I get all of that. But to your point, what we're saying is that in e-com, what we saw was this HDI moment begin to enact. We saw applications.
The process became horizontally digital integrated.
Correct. And that's the point. And the point is that, look, at the end of 23, we've reached a level of maturity. And I know there's a lot of transformation fatigue in this industry. But what we're seeing and what we're explaining to people is, look, we're now here. We're now at a place where interoperability, which is driven by what we refer to as HDI, horizontal digital integration, is here. What I was asked last week, what does interoperability mean? What does it actually mean? It means predictability. And predictability means that we can begin through integration, through data standards, to be able to look at transactions and start to connect them up so that we can begin to look at predicting when a transaction could happen or can happen. And that's good for everybody involved because, being blunt about it, let's put the consumer at the heart. Consumers want to predict when things are going to happen. They want to choose when to move. And so everything is moving towards this place. And therefore, there's a distinct opportunity, especially for lenders, I think, but for everybody in the ecosystem, but especially for lenders, to actually begin to start to lay the foundations. Because if there's one thing that they're trying to push, margin growth, they've done that typically through looking at operational efficiency measures and thinking, well, how can we become more operationally efficient? Now it's about saying, well, actually, how can we get margin growth, not just from being operationally efficient, but from delivering a better service? How about we start to move to in-life servicing? And how can we now start to give our customers, when they're in their mortgage, actually offering them products and services based on this connectivity and being able to see what's happening, not just from the transaction, from when they're purchasing or when they're remortgaging, but actually in life. So there's lots of benefits to HDI, but it's here and it's coming. And I think the opening bit for me was very much that graph and helping people to understand that. And obviously we're kind of doing the rounds with it at the moment across different actor groups in the industry sector to help them understand just kind of, what this means and what role they can play in benefiting from it.
So just dig in one final point really on, I say probably not the final point, but one kind of thought on that graph. Why do you think it is that there's a slow in the acceleration towards further maturity in the marketplace?
The simple answer to that is that there hasn't been a provider, somebody in the ecosystem that has been able to connect the ecosystem up. So we've seen platform providers
Siloed.
kind of, well, they're not really siloed, because we can see that there's providers that have come into market that have got something, it could be Pexa with Pexa Pay, it could be Koju with what they've got. But essentially, none of them they haven't got the distribution. They've not got they're not already connected into the ecosystem at scale. And so that's the reason why, is that the almost closed loop platforms have not got that connectivity yet.
Yep.
They've not got that adoption rate yet. That will change over time. You've got LMS with their MPTN, the National Property Transaction Network. They've taken a more agnostic approach. They've got the distribution. I think you're absolutely going to start to see that now, because the reason that dropped is that there hasn't been somebody in the ecosystem that has been able to say, well, actually, we've got the distribution to go and do this. Or they've got the distribution, but they've not been able to interconnect or interoperate it with HDI fully as of yet. And so I think what we're going to see over the next 24 months especially is that start to take effect. And it's not just, this isn't going to be one player that's going to, transform this. Truth is, the market wasn't ready for it. It is ready. It's been ready for it, but the maturity hasn't been there. But all the parts are in place now. And I think what you're going to see is this collaboration, which the industry's talked about so sort of passionately, really being tested, because it's that collaboration that's going to really drive it on now. And as people begin to interconnect, begin to collaborate, begin to lay the interoperability in, that's where you'll start to see that uptick in that graph really start to take shape.
So let's look at lenders.
Yep.
Right now, they're typically looking at three things. They're looking at data interoperability foundations, they're looking at customer insights activation, and they're looking at operational cost reductions. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
What's next?
Really, it's about building midterm capabilities so that they can enable in-life servicing and start to boost margins. So those interoperability foundations that they are laying now, it's about enabling them for real-time data flows, especially between their systems, because that's what's going to start to give them enhanced predictive analytics, enhanced predictions of actually what's happening, not just in life, but actually what's happening in the mortgage process as well. So at the moment, it's a lot of it might feel like a lot of buzzwords, HDI, interoperability, digital transformation, blah, 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 but actually this is really important. And I think that there's a risk of all actors in this process almost getting a bit caught up in, oh God, more buzzwords kind of thing. But, this is really important. So that what they're doing now is enabling them for that next phase. And, a big takeaway point here is that, the smart lenders are doing this because they know they've got to develop an ecosystem of partnerships. So if you're a vendor serving this landscape, if you're an actor that sits left or right of that lender process, you really need to sit up and listen to this, because it's critically important. Because if you're not, you're going to be left behind, because if you've not advanced your application, if you're not building your systems with interoperability in mind, when those top tier lenders start to look at their partnership ecosystem in that next phase, and they're now laying the foundations now, this isn't just some lenders, this is all of them are laying the foundations now, you're going to miss a trick in the next phase. And for those lenders that are thinking about kind of what their HDI strategy needs to look like, certainly the ones that we're looking at working with and the ones that we're in conversation with about working with, are all asking the same question, which is, can we get a visibility of what the partner ecosystem looks like from a maturity standpoint for how they're going to interact with us? Because if we're really going to ensure that we can leverage end-to-end capabilities, we need to make sure that the maturity in market is keeping up to speed with what we're doing. And we're being asked to give a view on that. And so, I just heard a conversation that you've just come from.
About that.
So, but this is happening. So that's what's going to happen next. And that lays the foundation for later. So for me, yes, lenders are doing this, but there's a message for the wider ecosystem there. Get on this, because you don't want to get left behind.
Yeah, and equally be agnostic about it, because
yes.
And I guess I'm thinking about that conversation that I've literally just had. The reason they're talking to us specifically is because we're agnostic. There's so many players in the industry, but there's also a lot of advisories who've almost got skin in the game, but you have to be impartial with this because what's right for one lender is almost certainly not right for another.
Yeah.
And it's that stack that supports the end-to-end process is going to be completely different for pretty much every single actor in the ecosystem. So we have to make sure that from a technology standpoint that it's assessed independently and the right pieces are put in the right holes, because otherwise this process and this maturity never accelerates.
True. And to add to that, if you look at a tool like Zapier, Zapier is a tool that most people will have heard of. If you've not, really simply, it's essentially a smart API integration capability where there's a lot of SME vendors. This is cross-market. It's not specific to home buying and selling industry or the mortgage sector. But Zapier essentially is an application that if I've got an accounting package 0 and I want to connect my accounting package to my management tool of Monday.com, which does a load of work on timesheets and things like that to assess where consultants and whatever else are and where the billing is on. I can connect that directly without having to write code using a tool like Zapier. I can just hook it up. I can connect it to data analytics. I can do this. That's like interoperability HDI at scale. So it's happening. And if we look at the e-commerce market, going back to my little graph at the start, you've got guys and girls in the bedrooms literally launching e-com platforms and integrating all these systems, including AI capabilities for not just advanced analytics, but pricing, metric, all that kind of stuff. And they're using a tool like that to do this stuff at scale. This is going to happen in this sector. There's not going to be a kind of a similar type of tool. I don't mean it like that. But what I'm trying to explain is that, to your point about being agnostic and looking across the market, if you're a vendor, it's important that you can connect your system into other people's. Wherever you sit in the ecosystem, you've got to be able to enable interoperability. You've got to be able to have a HDI strategy. What does that look like? Why do you have to have one? Because you need to be a facilitator, somebody that's going to literally allow that transaction to flow in that horizontal state. And if you look at every application that sits inside the e-commerce world, including the giants such as Amazon and everybody else, what's the one thing that they make super simple? Integration. It's not hard, it's commonplace, and they make it easy.
And interestingly, last week, someone in the industry asked me, so what will interoperability, when done well, what does it look like? And I said, well, actually, it's symptomatic. And what I mean by that is when something's happened, it's either happened faster or more effectively or more efficiently. And so these benefits realised either to the customer because it's happened quicker, or their title's being lodged quicker at the end of the process, whatever it might be. Something's happened that is a better outcome than what we had before because it's been triggered by that interoperability piece. And that's almost a success metric they need to look to, right? Everyone in the industry is trying to improve it in one way or the other. And actually the big thing that we're seeing, and really I guess what we're getting to, is that the improvements that can be realised independently by each actor and each player in the market, well, they've almost all been realised already. The next benefits and the next steps forward are all through partnerships, through interoperable collaboration, and that's where the next strides forward are being taken.
But that comes back to my point earlier about, the industry's been kind of harping on about collaboration for a long time. And this is it now. This is your genuine opportunity to begin to collaborate.
And how many times do we say about collaboration, we see people's eyes roll?
But I think, again, it's probably a bit of a buzzy phrase, isn't it, that's been used and not necessarily been acted upon. That said, I think very positively, I do see a lot of it kind of out there on the ground. And, people that essentially are competing, they are
both getting around tables.
Exactly. They're getting around the table, and that's important. I think my closing comment around this would be, I guess, some top tips really just to kind of help people progress with this.
Oh, Chris's top tips. We haven't had those in a while.
Have we not? Oh.
Well, a couple of weeks. We had a Christmas and an event in between.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, my top tips for this are dead simple. Number one, have a HDI strategy.
Yep.
What does a HDI strategy look like? Which is number two. Dead simple. Always define strategy in the same way that we do, which is where do we play? How do we win? Mm-hmm. So just define your HDI strategy like that. Where do you play? Look left and right of you.
Yep.
How do we win? How do we become more interoperable with what's happening left or right? Number three, do this in increments. Don't try to solve the whole equation in one go. Do it incrementally. So start small, as we always say, and scale it from there. And if you think about our top tips and things that we actually talk about, whether it's in these sessions or anywhere else, there's a bit of a pattern. There is a pattern. We always start with the strategic bit. Yep. We always leverage let them know where that kind of works. And we always say work in increments. Yep. So, it's not complicated in terms of the process for doing this. The application of it may well be at times, but it's about finding the right people to collaborate with who are at the same place as you. One thing I would say is those of you that are kind of in major transformation programs and kind of building your own systems up at the moment, and as well as choosing vendors, it's an important question to ask yourself internally, or selves internally. What's our HDI strategy look like, and what does the future proofing of this look like? And vendors that are coming in, how do we interconnect you into other areas of our existing ecosystem that might be legacy stack, as well as other people in this sort of outside ecosystem? So they'd be kind of my sort of big pointers, really.
Good. I like them.
So that concludes this episode of the Digital Disruption Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode about HDI, we'd love to invite you along to our webinar, which is taking place on the 27th of February. To sign up to the webinar, where we'll be talking about HDI specifically through the lens of lenders and what it actually means, digging deeper into some of the topics that we've been covering today and showing you some of those strategies. You can register online by going to novus-strategy.com. You'll see a link on the homepage to register for the webinar, which is on February the 27th at 1 p.m. For now, thanks for joining Pete and I. Don't forget to like and follow. And if you've got any questions, as always, don't hesitate to get in touch. Bye for now.
Thanks a lot.